say, just so you know, we're ashamed the President of the United States is from Texas.
Maybe you're talking to someone you don't know very well, and you ask them what kind of music they like. And they say, I like everything except rap and country. It's a cliched response. I know in my teens it's how I described my musical taste. Nowadays you'll hear a lot of people drop the rap part. Rap is mainstream enough that not having some kind of rap you like is unusual, if not unheard of. But that leaves country. Why has country developed such a widespread reputation for being unlikable, derivative, and even bigoted? Why does it only see mainstream success with crossover artists like Taylor Swift or a one-off Beyonce single? Why does country have its own award show that's basically mutually exclusive with the Grammys? Well, as a YouTube talking head, I have the only correct answers to these vague, ultimately pointless questions, and I'll be answering them on this, the first episode of Record Breaker. So, as my first episode, let me introduce myself. I'm Danny, and I like hot cakes. Hot Takes. Record Breaker is a show about stories in music, successes, tragedies, and oddities alike. Every episode of Record Breaker, I plan to take an interesting piece of music history or thought, break it down, give my own perspective, and hopefully build a fulfilling synthesis at the end. At the very least, I'll introduce you to some good new music. I want to start out by talking about my own personal experience with country, because it's a nice microcosm of the greater cultural experience with the genre. The truth is, I had a country phase. It was a Charlie Daniels phase mostly. He drew me in like the devil drew Johnny into an ill-conceived fiddle battle for his soul. I loved songs like Uneasy Rider and In America. I don't have much of a taste for the music anymore, but his band was super talented. Uneasy Rider, an early Daniels Band song, released in 1973, is basically a 4-minute beat poem with really interesting call and response instrumentals fluttering about in the background the whole time. The Devil Went Down to Georgia is a classic, based on an earlier bluegrass instrumental. The entire verse is in D, except for Thanks. D minor is an easy key to riff on and opens up space for the bluegrass musicians to show their virtuosic chops. Earlier Daniels Band also approached counterculture as a friend. Looking at the lyrics to Uneasy Rider, Daniels characterizes the speaker as a long-haired hippie with a peace symbol on his truck. Looking at pictures of the guy from the 70s, it's not difficult to conclude that the Uneasy Rider was Daniels. He talks about his connection to 70s counterculture, or at least drug culture, in Long-Haired Country Boy too. Daniels finds himself skirting the law, getting into trouble with locals, and generally being a social outcast. Outlaw country was filled with these kinds of counterculture personalities. Mendocino, by the Sir Douglas Quartet, celebrates West Coast hippie-free love and Mexican culture. Willie Nelson? Well, he sure likes drugs. My favorite has to be Johnny Cash. I swear, every one of his songs starts out like, I used my Colt 45 to kill a guy in a dive bar, and then I used a second Colt 45, which I also cherish, to kill the guy that snitched.
Any of the guards are still speaking to me. Could I have a glass of water?
Can you imagine something like this happening today? Conservatives across America are primed to despise criminals as if they lack humanity. No Toby Keith would be seen empathizing with the incarcerated, much less making a joke at the expense of a police officer. Cash probably had the sickest outlaw cred of any country musician, and not just because of his music. He regularly toured the prison circuit, and his most famous album is At Folsom Prison, a live album he played at Folsom Prison. Cash also campaigned actively for prison justice reforms and Native American rights. Outlaw country had its wax periods and its wane periods over the next 20 years, but there's one event that turned country into the monolith it's been for basically 2 decades. Skerplauser! It's 9/11. Yes, 9/11 ruined country. It broke conservatives' brains. And liberals and centrists too, but that's not relevant to the decline of country. 9/11 as a single event caused an overnight shift in American culture, possibly the biggest in living memory and certainly the biggest in the 21st century. Images of war vanished from mainstream cultural depictions. Government and media alike suppressed criticism of the Bush administration, and unlike the boogeyman of campus activists, these threats to free speech were real and manifested in dangerous legislation like the Patriot Act. Down the line, SESTA and FOSTA. Compared to the Vietnam War, where media showed the grotesquerie of the American war machine every night, Iraq and Afghanistan were remarkably sanitized. Where with Vietnam, the media showcased images of the dead every night, the War on Terror, when it appeared on television, looked more like distant explosions and flag-veiled caskets surrounded by stoic operators. Much of mainstream culture has now metabolized the disaster of the War on Terror, but country music took its market share of jingoism and nationalism and never let go. Lilac Breasted Roller on Tumblr has a pretty detailed take that stoked my thoughts on the topic. With very few exceptions, including Goodbye Earl, Before He Cheats, and Daddy Lessons. Side note, all women. 9/11 ruined country music. Mainstream country music for well over a decade now has been a glut of trash performative, patriotic, working class but not really, lab-crafted Budweiser-sponsored nonsense that has managed to sound rebellious, or has convinced its fans that it sounds rebellious, without ever actually questioning any power structure. Artists who actually criticized the government were literally blacklisted for nearly a decade. Links in the description for that post. In November 2001, immediately post 9/11, Charlie Daniels released This Ain't No Rag, It's a Flag, and in May 2002, Toby Keith released Courtesy of the Red, White, and Blue, parentheses, The Angry American. The songs are virtually identical. And this isn't me ragging on Keith for plagiarism either. There's a deep cultural through line that spawned them both and ultimately led to the current state of mainstream country. To his credit though, Daniel's song actually has the musical credibility of Southern rock, unlike Keith's cookie-cutter stadium anthem. Both have a pathological fixation on the cowardice of the attacks. Both connect the eagle to American air power, a metaphor which has aged extremely well. They've both got callous comparisons of bombs to rain. I mean, they're war songs, they're war anthems, and they whipped country music fans into a nationalistic fury that purged country of any voices that did not toe that line. I felt teary-eyed pride at the thought of America and its obvious virtues, even as we prepared for a thuggish entanglement that a clear majority of Americans would begin to hate. I sang along to them joyfully as I played like E-rated games on Newgrounds and never, ever touched meat and fuck. Not even out of curiosity. Definitely not. In early 2003, the Dixie Chicks played a live show in London. Nowadays, they're basically forgotten as an early 2000s powerhouse. Our war-induced cultural amnesia has replaced them with acts like Destiny's Child. But at the time, they were the best-selling all-female group in US history. And then Natalie Maines said,
Just so you know, we're ashamed the President of the United States is from Texas.
The London crowd roared in solidarity, but in the US the story was different. Vastly different. The backlash for the Dixie Chicks was swift, massively disproportionate, and at times would have been hilarious if it hadn't been in service of a disastrous war. The backlash seems to have started on a conservative forum called Free Republic, a Web 0.0 site whose aesthetic sense is about as sophisticated as a urinal at Denny's. Ditsy Chicks! Dixie Hicks. Vichy Chicks? Ditsy Chickens? He's confused about that one. X-fans, red-faced and enraged, started burning their CDs, and in one particularly famous instance, literally got a fucking bulldozer to destroy merch. Which is, I guess, the most American way to boycott something. If I can't have it, no one can. Also, look at this big fucking truck. In our society of instant media cycles, this is now an ancient cultural drama. But it changed country completely. With the Dixie Chicks gone, the usurper Toby Keith ushered in an era of Boeing, Raytheon, Lockheed, Pentagon-sponsored derivative country arena rock we have now. Okay, I can call it derivative all I like, but what changed about the music? Actually, the Dixie Chicks were bringing about a new renaissance in country music before their very tame anti-war comments in 2003. Like roots country music, they wrote complex parts for banjo, fiddle, mandolin, and guitar. The three girls had impressive voices, and their songs made good use of their ability to pull off three-part harmonies. Oh Brother Where Art Thou, a Coen Brothers film which heavily featured roots country bluegrass music, definitely bolstered their success. After the Dixie Chicks were purged from country, one man basically dictated the sound that country would develop. Toby Keith, who looks like what his music sounds like. Keith basically took the genre in the polar opposite direction. Instead of arranging songs to a diverse set of acoustic instruments, he set them to guitar chords, and often a cloyingly stereotypical slide guitar. The harmonies are there, but they don't have the vitality of the Chicks, where the relatively equal footing of the members gave each voice a distinct flavor. With Keith's music, it's just Toby and several not Tobys. He's a sycophant to base nationalism, and he doesn't even want to bust those Tobys. Keith's monopoly and the post 9/11 allergy descent also did another thing to country. It all but annihilated outlaw country. The original Post makes this point perfectly. How can you sing the praises of lawbreakers when your main circuit consists of singing to troops? Toby Keith is the anti-Johnny Cash. Polar opposites existing in the same broad genre. And let me be clear, the Dixie Chicks were not outlaw country. The legacy of outlaw country is now long forgotten. But there was a time when country music was genuinely rebellious, not like this faux rebellion hawked by artists like Toby with a lifetime supply of cowboy cosplay from Crown Royal and $20 million a year from Cracker Barrel's arms manufacturing division. Like I said, 9/11 changed American culture deeply. I said earlier that it was overnight, but there's long been a through line of this type of American nationalism that guaranteed any attack on our soil would catalyze this type of transformation. Suddenly I understood chest-beating nationalist rhetoric like "these colors don't run," and what it meant to call someone the F-slur as Daniels does in Uneasy Rider. And that post-9/11 journey, from hysteric nationalism to war-weary wokeness, isolated country culturally. It was impregnable from without and stagnant from within. There's no potential for an isolated genre driven basically by dogma and sponsors. I've found in my research that outside artists refer to mainstream country as Nashville, indicating that they too see the iron grip of top-down organization negatively affecting country music. Or this is all just drivel and there's no way to objectively determine the value of art. I imagined that my departure from country had more to do with tastes and values than anything in the genre changing itself that made it inaccessible to people to the left of Dick Cheney politically. And that includes anyone who, without thinking, says, "I like everything but rap and country." Now, this was the hard part for me. As it turns out, I actually just don't like a lot of country. But I promised myself I'd make an honest run at finding some genuinely good artists. As it happens, there are a good number of country musicians fighting against the exact trend I've been describing for 15 minutes. I found K-Mag Yo-Yo by Hayes Carl in a Pitchfork article from late 2018 addressing the state of outlaw country. K-Mag Yo-Yo, am I saying that right? Is military slang for "kiss my ass goodbye, you're on your own." But right out of the gates, Carl's speaker shows a disillusionment with militarism. His dad had told him that the military would be great, full of sex, heroism, and drugs. No, wait a minute. His dad told him that the military would be great, full of heroism, sex, and money. But Carl's speaker finds only confusion and pointless death. Shit like this is basically unheard of in country. I mean, come on. Bold of Carl to go for the genre's jugular, but it pays off. The entire song is basically a vamp on a tight blues that alternates between these breathless, talk-sung passages and passages for the band to show off. This shit is rough, and I love it. It sounds like the best dive bar you've ever been to. Some parts do sound a little samey. I mean, there's only so much you can do with a blues everyone's heard 10 million times. But Carl's musical ideas are varied enough that they keep it interesting. Country can be even more of a boys' club than genres like hard rock and hip-hop, excepting the crossover queen herself, so I had to include Margo Price on here. I probably won't add her to my heavy rotation, but hearing her angelic voice spit the word ass over those creamy slide guitars I usually find cloying was a treat. She leans much more heavily into the country ballad style than the other artists I've mentioned here, but her forays into the electric blue outlaw style like This Town Gets Around are delightful. 9-Pound Hammer! When I heard about this fucking band, I knew I had to include them here. They're one of the founding examples of cowpunk, and yes, that's punk fused with country. 9-Pound Hammer takes the roots and blues side of country and hammers it into a punk form, and it rules. Their cover of Cash's Baby, Folsom Prison Blues, is a great example of their work, and probably my favorite of theirs. It's a straight punk rocker with a searing outro. There's goofy numbers like Cookin' the Corn that don't hold up if you insist on being serious, but come on, it's fun. And that's it. I can heartily recommend all three of these artists. And from my research, you better believe that there's a dialogue about the shittier trends in country music growing every day. Will it ever escape its cultural isolation? Maybe not. But I think crossover artists like T-Swift and alternative country singers have a chance yet to bridge that divide. Thanks for watching, everyone. I can't believe I did my first episode on country and politics, honestly. I don't intend for either to be a running theme. If you watched and enjoyed, please leave a like, and a subscription with a kind comment would be wonderful. If you watched and didn't enjoy, please email contact@tobykeith.org to file any grievances. I have lots of things planned for my upcoming videos, including a big episode on Spotify and the panopticon of music streaming services, which was also the subject of a research project I conducted for my graduate program. But what do you think I should talk about? If you know of a delightful oddity or strange music happenstance, let me know in the comments. I'd also like to acknowledge my music and sound producer, Alex D. Pasquale. He's terrific, and if you enjoyed the soundtrack to this video, I've included some links in the description where you can check out more of his work. This has been O Record Breaker, Where Art Thou? See you next time.